The screen door slammed shut, its rusty hinges screeching like a final judgment. Elias Kane, barely 14, stood trembling on the porch of his family's Alabama mansion, the weight of his father's words still burning in his ears. "You're no son of mine." His crime? Loving someone he wasn't supposed to, a boy named Caleb, whose shy smile had unraveled everything Elias thought he knew about himself. He clutched his backpack, stuffed with a few clothes and a dog-eared journal, as his mother's silhouette lingered behind the lace curtains. Unmoving. No goodbye. No second chance. The humid air clung to his skin, thick with the scent of magnolias and betrayal. Elias took a step forward, then another, his sneakers crunching against the gravel driveway. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The life he'd known, Sunday church, family dinners, the promise of inheriting the Kane legacy was gone. At 14, he was in exile in his own hometown. The town of Willow Creek was small, its streets lined with clapboard houses and judgmental eyes. Elias felt them watching as he walked, head down, toward the bus station. Whispers followed him like shadows. That Kane boy, unnatural, shame on them. His father, Pastor Jeremiah Kane, was the town's moral compass, a man whose sermons could make sinners weep. But tonight, his righteousness had carved a wound too deep to heal. Elias's only crime was a stolen kiss behind the school gym, a moment of courage that cost him everything. The bus station was a flickering neon beacon at the edge of town. Elias bought a one-way ticket to Atlanta with the crumpled bills he'd saved from mowing lawns. The driver, a grizzled man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions. As the bus rumbled to life, Elias pressed his forehead against the cool window, watching Willow Creek shrink into nothingness. He was alone, but something fierce burned inside him, a spark of defiance, a vow to prove them all wrong. Atlanta was a beast of a city, loud and chaotic, nothing like the sleepy streets of Willow Creek. Elias stepped off the bus into a world that didn't care who he was or what he'd lost. His first night was spent in a shelter, surrounded by strangers with their own stories of rejection. He learned quickly, survival meant hustle. He washed dishes at a diner, swept floors at a barbershop, and saved every penny. At night, he wrote in his journal, pouring out dreams of a life where he wasn't just surviving but thriving. He imagined returning to Willow Creek one day, not as a broken boy, but as a man who'd built something unbreakable. By 16, Elias had found a makeshift family in the city's underground queer community. There was Marisol, a trans woman who ran a thrift store and taught him how to sew, and Jamal, a drag performer who showed him how to laugh through the pain. They became his anchors, his proof that love didn't have to hurt. But the ache of Willow Creek never faded. He'd see his father's face in nightmares, hear his mother's silence in every unanswered prayer. They'd taken his home, his name, his future, so they thought. Elias enrolled in night school, juggling work and classes with a relentless drive. He was good with numbers, better with ideas. A teacher noticed his knack for problem solving and slipped him a book on entrepreneurship. Elias devoured it. Then another. Then 10 more. He started small, selling custom patches Marisol helped him design, then moving to thrift flip clothing online. By 18, he had a small Etsy shop pulling in enough to rent a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much, but it was his. The turning point came when he met Lena Chun, a sharp-tongued venture capitalist at a startup fair. She saw something in Elias' grit, maybe, or hunger, and offered him a chance to pitch an idea. He didn't have one. Not yet. But he lied through his teeth and said he did. For 3 sleepless nights, he crafted a plan for a sustainable fashion app, one that connected queer designers with ethical suppliers. Lena bought it. She invested $50. 000. And Elias Kane, the boy kicked out at 14, became a CEO at 20. His app, Rethread, exploded. It wasn't just about clothes, it was about identity. community, and second chances. Queer youth, especially those who'd been rejected like him, found a platform to create and sell. Rethread's mission was simple: turn pain into power. By 25, Elias was a millionaire, his face on magazine covers, his name a whisper in boardrooms. But success didn't erase the past. Willow Creek still haunted him, a ghost he couldn't outrun. He hadn't planned to go back. Not yet. But when he got the call that his father's church was facing foreclosure, something shifted. The mansion, the land, the legacy, it was all slipping away. Elias could have let it crumble. Instead, he saw an opportunity. Not for revenge, but for reclamation. He booked a flight to Alabama, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. The plane touched down in Birmingham, and Elias rented a car, a sleek black Tesla that felt like armor. The drive to Willow Creek was a blur of cotton fields and faded billboards. As he crossed the town line, memories flooded back: Caleb's laugh, his mother's tears, his father's fist slamming the table. Elias tightened his grip on the wheel. He wasn't that scared kid anymore. He was a man who'd built an empire from nothing, and he was coming home. Willow Creek hadn't changed. The same cracked sidewalks, the same faded diner sign, the same church steeple piercing the sky like a warning. Elias pulled into the town square, his Tesla drawing stares from locals sipping coffee outside the general store. He stepped out, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the boy who'd left in a ripped hoodie. The air was thick with humidity and suspicion, but Elias walked with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He headed straight for the bank. The foreclosure notice on his father's church had been public for weeks, but no one in Willow Creek had the means to save it. Elias did. He'd spent the last decade turning pain into profit, and now he held the power to rewrite his story. The banker, a wiry man named Mr. Hargrove, blinked in disbelief when Elias introduced himself. Elias Kane. Pastor Kane's boy. His voice dripped with the same small-town judgment Elias remembered too well. Not a boy anymore, Elias said, sliding a portfolio across the desk. I'm here to buy the church and the estate. Hargrove's eyebrows shot up as he skimmed the document's Rethread's valuation. Elias's net worth. A cash offer that dwarfed the church's debt. The deal was done in an hour. By noon, Elias owned the land his family had lorded over for generations. The irony wasn't lost on him. He drove to the mansion next, the place where his world had shattered. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, but it still stood proud, a monument to his father's pride. Elias hadn't seen his parents in 11 years. He didn't know if they'd recognize Heimer, if they'd care. He knocked, his heart a drumbeat in his chest. His mother answered, her face older, thinner, but still sharp with the same quiet disapproval. Elias, she whispered, her hand clutching the doorframe. I'm not here to fight, he said, voice steady. I own this place now. I'm giving you a week to move out. Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. His father appeared behind her, his once booming voice now a rasp. You've got no right. Jeremiah spat. Elias met his gaze, unflinching. I have every right. You made sure of that when you threw me out. He left them standing there, their shock a small victory. But victory didn't feel like he'd imagined. It was hollow, heavy with the weight of years spent proving himself to people who'd never see him. Elias drove to the church next, its white walls faded but still imposing. He walked inside, the pews empty, the air thick with dust and memory. He could almost hear his father's sermons, the ones that condemned him before he even knew who he was. That night, he checked into a motel on the edge of town. Sleep didn't come. Instead, he opened his laptop and scrolled through Rethread's community forums, where queer kids shared their stories: rejection, resilience, hope. One post caught his eye, a teenager named Riley. kicked out by their family in a town not unlike Willow Creek. Elias typed a reply, offering mentorship and a job. He'd built Rethread to be a lifeline, and he wasn't done yet. The next morning, he met with the town's real estate agent, a woman named Clara who didn't flinch at his last name. He laid out his plan, turned the mansion into a community center for queer youth, a safe haven for kids like Riley, like the boy he'd been. The church would stay a church, but not his father's kind. It would be a place of acceptance, where love wasn't a sin. Clara nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "You're doing something good here, Elias," she said. He wanted to believe her. Word spread fast. By afternoon, the town was buzzing. Some called him a hero, others, a heretic. At the diner, he overheard whispers, "That Kane boy's back. Thinks he's better than us." He ignored them, but the words stung. He wasn't here to gloat. He was here to build something better than the hate that had driven him away. Then he saw Caleb. It was at the gas station. Of all places, Caleb pumping fuel into a beat-up truck. He was older now, his boyish grin replaced by a weary slump. But those green eyes were unmistakable. Elias's heart lurched. They hadn't spoken since that kiss, since the night Caleb's parents had dragged him away, promising to fix him. Elias approached, his voice catching. "Caleb." Caleb froze, then turned, his face a mix of shock and something soft regret. Maybe, or relief. "Elias Kane," he said, almost a whisper. "Heard you were back." They stood there, the years between them heavy with unspoken words. Elias wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but all he managed was, "You okay?" Caleb nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. They agreed to meet later at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town. It was neutral ground, away from prying eyes. Over lukewarm coffee, Caleb told his story, conversion therapy, a failed engagement, a life spent hiding. Elias listened, his chest tight with anger and guilt. He'd escaped, built a life, while Caleb had stayed, trapped in Willow Creek's suffocating grip. "I thought about you," Caleb admitted, staring into his cup. "Wondered where you went." "I'm here now," Elias said, and the words felt like a promise. They talked for hours, the conversation raw, tentative, but real. Caleb wasn't ready to come out. Not yet, but Elias saw a spark in him, the same one that had drawn them together all those years ago. As they parted, Elias slipped him a card with Rethread's logo. "If you ever need a way out," he said, "call me." Back at the motel, Elias lay awake. Caleb's face burned into his mind. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for Caleb, for Riley, for every kid who'd been told they weren't enough. Willow Creek had tried to break him, but he'd come back stronger. And he wasn't done yet. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek as Elias stood outside the mansion, blueprints in hand. The community center was no longer a dream, but a plan, with contractors arriving next week to gut the old house and rebuild it as a sanctuary. He traced the outline of the porch where he'd been banished, imagining a new door, one that welcomed instead of rejected. But the weight of the past clung to him, a reminder that rebuilding a house was easier than rebuilding trust. He hadn't expected Caleb to call so soon. The text came at dawn, "Can we talk?" Somewhere private. Elias suggested the old oak grove by the river, a place they'd snuck off to as kids, before everything fell apart. When he arrived, Caleb was already there, leaning against a tree, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. The years had etched lines around his eyes, but his presence still made Elias's pulse race. "I can't stop thinking about what you said," Caleb began, his voice low. "About getting out." He kicked at the dirt, avoiding Elias's gaze. "I tried to be what they wanted. I went to therapy, dated girls, even got engaged. But it's like I'm living someone else's life." Elias listened, his heart aching. He knew that feeling the suffocation of pretending, the fear of being seen. You don't have to stay, Elias said. Rethread's hiring. You could come to Atlanta. Start over. Caleb's laugh was bitter. And leave everything. My job. My family. They'd disown me. Just like yours did. Elias stepped closer. His voice firm. They don't own you. Caleb. You do. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Elias saw the boy he'd loved, still there beneath the pain. They walked along the river, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. Caleb admitted he'd followed Elias's rise through news articles, marveling at how the scared kid from Willow Creek had become a titan. You made it look easy, he said. Elias shook his head. It wasn't. But it was worth it. He told Caleb about the shelter, the hustle, the nights he'd cried himself to sleep. He told him about Marisol and Jamal, about Lena's investment, about Rethread's mission. Caleb listened, his walls slowly crumbling. By the time they parted, Caleb hadn't made a decision, but Elias felt a shift. He'd planted a seed, and that was enough for now. Back in town, Elias met with Clara again, finalizing permits for the community center. She introduced him to a local architect, a woman named Aisha who'd grown up in Willow Creek and left for college, only to return with a vision for change. Aisha was queer too, and her enthusiasm for the project matched Elias's. This town needs this, she said, sketching designs for a rooftop garden, a place where kids can just be. The next few days were a blur of meetings and plans. Elias hired a team to manage the church's transition, partnering with a progressive pastor from Birmingham who shared his vision. The community center would offer counseling, job training, and creative workshops, all tailored for queer youth. Elias poured his own money into it, but he also launched a crowdfunding campaign through Rethread, raising thousands in hours. Messages poured in from across the country. Thank you for giving us hope. But not everyone was on board. At a town hall meeting, Elias faced a crowd of skeptical locals. His father was there, sitting in the front row, his face a mask of disapproval. A man in a trucker hat stood up, voice shaking with anger. You're turning our town into some kind of gay haven. This ain't what Willow Creek's about. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Elias took a deep breath, stepping to the podium. Willow Creek is about community, he said, his voice steady but fierce. It's about protecting our kids, not throwing them out. I was one of those kids. You all know what happened to me. I'm not here to tear this town down, I'm here to build it up. For everyone. The room fell silent, some faces softening, others hardening. His father stood and left without a word. That night, Elias found a brick through the motel window. A note tied to it, go back to Atlanta. He stared at the jagged glass, fear creeping in, but he pushed it down. He'd faced worse. He called Aisha and Clara, and they agreed to increase security at the mansion. Rethread's team sent support, offering to fly in volunteers to help with the project. Elias wasn't alone anymore, but the threat lingered, a reminder that change came at a cost. Caleb showed up at the motel an hour later, his truck idling in the parking lot. I heard about the brick, he said, his jaw tight. You okay? Elias nodded, but his hands shook as he showed Caleb the note. Caleb's eyes darkened. This town, it doesn't change easy. He hesitated, then added, I'm thinking about your offer. Atlanta. I just need time. Elias reached out, squeezing his shoulder. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. As Caleb drove off, Elias sat on the motel bed, the note in his hands. He wasn't just fighting for a building or a legacy. He was fighting for a future where no one had to hide. And he'd keep fighting, no matter what it took. The brick through the window was just the beginning. By the end of the week, graffiti marred the mansion's wall slurs in red paint. crude and vicious. Elias stood before them, his jaw tight, as Aisha documented the damage for the police. The sheriff, a burly man who'd known Elias's father for decades, promised to investigate, but his tone was lukewarm. "Folks around here don't like change," he said, as if that excused it. Elias didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that words meant nothing without action. He hired a security team from Birmingham, professionals who didn't blink at the town's hostility. The community center's construction began, bulldozers tearing into the mansion's outdated interior while Elias worked from a temporary office in the church. Emails flooded his inbox, support from Rethread's community, threats from anonymous locals. He read each one, saving the hate mail for evidence. Every slur fueled his resolve. Caleb started showing up daily, helping with small tasks, hauling debris, painting over graffiti. He didn't say much, but his presence was steady, grounding. One afternoon, as they sanded down a vandalized wall, Caleb spoke up. "I told my mom I might leave." Elias paused, his sander hovering. "What did she say?" Caleb shrugged, his eyes distant. "She cried. Said I was abandoning her. But I can't keep living like this." Elias nodded, knowing the weight of that choice. "You're not abandoning anyone. You're choosing yourself." Caleb's lips twitched, almost a smile. They worked in silence after that, the hum of construction filling the air. Elias caught himself stealing glances, remembering the boy who'd made his heart race behind the school gym. That boy was still there, buried under years of fear. The community center's progress drew attention. A local news crew from Birmingham arrived, filming Elias as he walked them through the site. He spoke with quiet passion, explaining how the center would offer therapy, job skills, and a safe space for queer youth. The reporter, a young woman named Maya, asked pointed questions. "You're Pastor Kane's son. Why come back to a town that rejected you?" Elias looked into the camera, unflinching. "Because no one else should have to leave." The story aired that night, going viral by morning. Donations poured in, along with messages from queer kids across the country. Riley, the teen Elias had connected with online, sent a video. "I'm coming to Willow Creek when the center opens. You're giving me a reason to keep going." Elias watched it on repeat, tears stinging his eyes. This was why he'd come back, not for revenge, but for redemption. His parents weren't as moved. They showed up at the church unannounced, his father's face a storm cloud. "You're making a mockery of this town," Jeremiah said, his voice echoing in the empty sanctuary. This was God's house. Elias stood his ground. "It still is. Just not your version of God." His mother, silent as ever, clutched her purse, her eyes darting between them. For a moment, Elias thought she might speak, but she turned and left, her husband following. The encounter left Elias shaken, but he didn't have time to dwell. A new threat emerged, a petition to block the community center, led by a group of churchgoers loyal to his father. They claimed it promoted sin and would corrupt the town's youth. Elias attended the next town council meeting, flanked by Aisha and Clara. The room was packed, tension crackling like static. He presented his case data on homeless queer youth, testimonials from Rethread's community, his own story. "I was one of those kids," he said. "I won't let Willow Creek fail another." The council was split, but Clara's influence swayed enough votes to keep the project alive. Elias left the meeting exhausted but victorious. Outside, Caleb was waiting, leaning against his truck. "You were incredible in there," he said, his voice soft. Elias grinned, adrenaline still pumping. "You watched." Caleb nodded. "Couldn't miss it. You're doing something real." They drove to the river again, the oak grove their unspoken refuge. Caleb opened up more than he ever had, talking about the conversion therapy that had left scars, the fiancé he'd never loved, the fear that kept him tethered to Willow Creek. Elias listened, his heart breaking and mending at once. "I want to be brave like you," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias reached for his hand, their fingers brushing. "You already are." The moment lingered, fragile and electric, until Caleb pulled away, his face conflicted. "I need to figure this out on my own," he said. Elias nodded, hiding his disappointment. "I'll be here." As Caleb walked away, Elias felt the weight of hope and heartache, two sides of the same coin. Back at the church, Elias found a new message painted on the door, "Freak." He stared at it, his fists clenched. He wasn't just fighting for himself or Caleb. He was fighting for every kid who'd been called that name, every kid who'd been told they didn't belong. He grabbed a can of paint and covered it, stroke by stroke, until it was gone. The community center's frame was rising, its skeleton of steel and would have promised taking shape. Elias walked the site daily, watching walls go up where his childhood had been torn down. The vandalism hadn't stopped more slurs. Slashed tires on the contractor's trucks, but neither had he. Security cameras caught blurry figures in the night, but the sheriff's investigation yielded nothing. Elias didn't care. He'd built Rethread from nothing. He could build this too. Caleb was there most days, his presence a quiet strength. He'd started opening up, sharing bits of his Lithia's sister who'd moved away, a job at the auto shop he hated. Elias noticed the way Caleb's hands lingered when they passed tools, the way his eyes softened when they talked. It was dangerous, this pull between them, but Elias couldn't resist it. Not when Caleb looked at him like he was the only thing that made sense. One evening, as they sat on the mansion's half-finished porch, Caleb broke the silence. "I applied for a job in Atlanta. Not with Rethread, but close by." Elias's heart leapt, but he kept his voice steady. "That's a big step." Caleb nodded, staring at the horizon. "I'm scared, but I'm tired of being scared." Elias reached for his hand, and this time, Caleb didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, a silent vow in the fading light. The moment was shattered by headlights. A truck roared up, and 3 men jumped out, their faces half hidden by ball caps. "You think you can just waltz in and ruin this town?" one shouted, his voice slurred with liquor. Elias stood, shielding Caleb. "This is my property. Leave." The men laughed, one stepping closer, a crowbar in hand. Elias's pulse raced, but he didn't back down. "You don't scare me," he said, his voice low and steady. Caleb stepped forward, his own voice shaking but firm. "Back off, Tommy." The leader Thomas sneered but hesitated, clearly recognizing Caleb. The standoff lasted seconds, but it felt like hours. Finally, Tommy spat on the ground and retreated, his buddies following. As their truck peeled out, Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Caleb's hand found his again, trembling. "You okay?" Elias asked. Caleb nodded, but his eyes were haunted. The incident shook them both, but it also galvanized Elias. He doubled security, hired a PR firm to counter the petition's narrative, and leaned harder into Rethread's network. Volunteers arrived from Atlanta queer youth, allies, even a few designers who'd made it big through the app. They painted murals, planted gardens, and turned the construction site into a beacon of hope. The news caught wind again, and Maya's follow-up story painted Elias as a trailblazer. Willow Creek was split, half cheering, half seething. His parents made one last attempt to stop him. They showed up at the church, his mother finally speaking. "Elias, this isn't what we wanted for you." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, he saw the mother who'd once read him bedtime stories. But then his father cut in. "You're tearing this family apart." Elias laughed, sharp and bitter. "You did that when you kicked me out." He walked away, leaving them in the empty sanctuary. Caleb's decision to move to Atlanta came a week later. He'd accepted a job at a mechanic shop. A fresh start. Elias offered to help him find an apartment, and they spent a weekend in the city, driving through neighborhoods, laughing over cheap diner food. It felt like a glimpse of something new, something possible. On their last night, Caleb kissed him just a brush of lips, tentative but real. "I'm not ready for more," Caleb said, his voice raw. "But I want to be." Elias nodded, his heart full. "I'll wait." Back in Willow Creek, the community center's grand opening was set for a month out. Elias threw himself into the final preparations, but the threats escalated. A fire broke out in the church's storage shed, ruled arson by the fire department. No one was hurt, but the message was clear: Willow Creek wasn't ready to let go of its hate. Elias met with the sheriff, who shrugged. Could have been kids. Elias didn't buy it, but he didn't have proof. He called Marisol and Jamal, who flew in from Atlanta to help. Their presence was a reminder of the family he'd built, the one that chose him. They strategized late into the night, planning a community event to rally support. "You're not just changing Willow Creek," Marisol said, her eyes fierce. "You're showing the world what's possible." Elias clung to her words, a lifeline in the storm. As the opening neared, Elias felt the weight of it all: his past, his future, the kids who'd come to the center, the man he was becoming. He wasn't just reclaiming a house or a legacy. He was reclaiming himself. The community center's walls were nearly complete, vibrant murals of hope and resilience covering the scars of vandalism. Elias stood in the main hall, watching volunteers hang rainbow flags alongside artwork from queer youth. The grand opening was days away, and the air buzzed with anticipation. But beneath it, tension simmered. The arson, the threats, the petition they hadn't stopped. Elias felt like he was walking a tightrope, one wrong step from falling. Caleb had left for Atlanta, his truck packed with everything he owned. Their goodbye was quiet, a hug that lingered too long, a promise to stay in touch. Elias missed him already, but Caleb's choice gave him hope. If Caleb could take that leap, maybe Willow Creek could change too. He threw himself into the final preparations, coordinating with Aisha and the Birmingham pastor, Reverend Torres, who'd agreed to lead the church's new mission. Torres was a forsworn, fierce, unapologetically queer. "This place is going to save lives," he told Elias, and Elias believed him. The community event was Marisol's idea, an open house to show Willow Creek what the center could be. They set up booths with rethread designers, mental health resources, and stories from queer youth. Riley, the teen from the forum, arrived with their foster mom, wide-eyed and nervous. Elias gave them a tour, watching their face light up at the art studio. "I can come here?" Riley asked, voice small. Elias nodded. "This is for you." The event drew a crowd, some curious, some hostile. Clara and Aisha worked the room, charming skeptics, while Marisol and Jamal performed a drag duet that had half the crowd cheering. Elias spoke last, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about every kid who's been told they don't belong. We're building a home for them, right here." Applause mixed with jeers, but Elias felt the tide shifting. Then Tommy and his crew showed up. They didn't enter, just lingered outside, shouting slurs and waving signs from the petition. Elias's security team kept them at bay, but the mood soured. As the crowd thinned, a rock sailed through a window, shattering glass across the floor. Riley flinched, and Elias's heart sank. He sent them home with their foster mom, promising they'd be safe. But he wasn't sure he believed it. That night, he found a note slipped under the church door: "You'll burn for this." Elias called the sheriff, who took the note but offered no promises. Marisol pulled him aside. "You're scaring them, Elias." That's why they're fighting back. He nodded, but fear gnawed at him. What if he'd pushed too far? What if someone got hurt? The next day, he got a call from Caleb. I saw the news about the rock, he said, his voice tight. I'm coming back for the opening. You shouldn't face this alone. Elias's throat tightened. You don't have to. But Caleb was firm. I want to. When he hung up, Elias felt a spark of courage reignite. He wasn't alone, not anymore. The opening day arrived. A crisp morning with a sky too blue for the storm brewing in Elias's chest. The center was ready, therapy rooms, a library, a garden blooming with possibility. Hundreds gathered supporters from Atlanta, locals who'd softened, kids like Riley who saw a future here. But Tommy's group was there too. Their signs uglier, their shouts louder. Elias ignored them, focusing on the ribbon cutting. Reverend Torres blessed the space, his voice a balm. This is a house of love, he said, and the crowd cheered. Caleb arrived just before the ceremony, his presence a quiet anchor. They stood side by side as Elias cut the ribbon, cameras flashing. For a moment, it felt like victory. Then a bottle flew from the crowd, narrowly missing Elias's head. Chaos erupted, shouts, shoving, security rushing in. Caleb pulled Elias behind a pillar, his grip fierce. Stay with me, he said, and Elias nodded, heart pounding. The police arrived, dispersing the crowd. No one was hurt, but the bottle had shaken Elias more than he'd admit. He found Riley in the art studio, sketching to calm their nerves. Is it always going to be like this? They asked. Elias knelt beside them. No. It's going to get better. We're making it better. Riley's small smile was worth every threat. As the day ended, Elias and Caleb sat on the center's rooftop. The town spread out below them. I'm proud of you, Caleb said, his voice soft. Elias looked at him. The boy he'd loved, now a man choosing his own path. I couldn't have done this without you, Elias admitted. Caleb's hand found his. And this time, neither pulled away. The community center's first week was a whirlwind. Kids like Riley filled the art studio. Therapists set up sessions. And Reverend Torres held services that welcomed everyone. Elias watched it unfold, his chest tight with pride and disbelief. He'd done this, turned his pain into a place of healing. But the threats hadn't stopped. Anonymous calls, more graffiti, a slashed tire on his Tesla. Willow Creek was a battleground, and Elias was still in the crosshairs. Caleb stayed. He'd taken leave from his new job in Atlanta, bunking at the motel with Elias. They didn't talk about the kiss, but the air between them crackled with possibility. Caleb helped with security, his quiet strength a shield against the town's hostility. One night, as they cleaned paint off the center's walls, he spoke up. I'm staying for good. Not just for you for this. He gestured at the building. It's bigger than us. Elias nodded, his heart swelling. It's always been bigger. They worked late, their laughter cutting through the tension. When Caleb's hand brushed his, Elias didn't pull away. They stood close, the world shrinking to just them, until a car horn blared outside, snapping them back. It was nothing, just a passerby, but it reminded Elias how fragile this moment was. The turning point came unexpectedly. His mother showed up at the center, alone, her face drawn. Elias braced himself, expecting another lecture. Instead, she held out a photo album, her hands trembling. These are yours, she said. I kept them. Inside were pictures of Elias as a child, smiling at a county fair, blowing out birthday candles, hugging her. His throat tightened. Why now? He asked. She looked away, her voice barely audible. I was wrong. We were wrong. It wasn't an apology. Not fully, but it was more than he'd ever expected. He took the album, their fingers brushing, and for the first time in years, he saw his mother, not the silence that had haunted him. She left without another word. But the album felt like a bridge. Shaky but real. The town began to shift. Not everyone, but enough. A few locals volunteered at the center, bringing casseroles and cautious smiles. The diner's owner, a gruff woman named Betty, started offering free coffee to the center's staff. Even the sheriff stepped up, arresting Tommy after catching him on camera spray painting the church. It wasn't justice. Not fully, but it was progress. Elias and Caleb grew closer, their bond a quiet anchor. They stole moments drives to the river, late-night talks on the rooftop. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Caleb spoke. "I'm ready now." He leaned in, and their kiss was slow, deliberate, a reclaiming of what they'd lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The center's first success story was Riley. They'd landed a scholarship through Rethread's network, heading to art school in Atlanta. At their goodbye party, Riley hugged Elias, tears in their eyes. "You saved me," they said. Elias shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it." As Riley left, Elias felt the weight of his purpose settle deeper. This was why he'd come back. On the center's 1-month anniversary, Elias stood before a crowd locals, volunteers, kids who'd found a home. His parents weren't there, but he hadn't expected them to be. He spoke of resilience, of love, of building something stronger than hate. Caleb stood beside him, their hands brushing, a silent promise. The crowd applauded, and for the first time, Elias felt Willow Creek might become a place he could call home again. He hadn't owned everything they'd tried to take, not yet. But he'd taken back his name, his story, his heart. The mansion, the church, the legacy, they were his now, reshaped into something better. As he looked out at the faces before him, at Caleb's quiet smile, at the kids painting murals and laughing, Elias knew this was only the beginning. Years later, the center stood as a beacon, its doors open to anyone who needed them. Elias and Caleb built a life together, not in Willow Creek, but close enough to visit. They weren't perfect, but they were real. And every time a kid walked through those doors, finding safety where Elias had found none, he knew he'd done what he'd set out to do. He'd returned as a man who owned everything, not just land or wealth, but the courage to love, to fight, to heal.